You know, all of us, human beings generally, we have a need to associate ourselves with someone, a group, or a society, or a clique. Even in high school, you have kids that are, you know, gothic or hip-hop or whatever else. Right? They dress a certain way, they talk a certain way, they associate themselves in certain circles. When you become professionals, maybe your circle of friends is all doctors because you're a doctor, or they're all accountants because you're an accountant, or they're all programmers because you're a programmer. Or we have other sorts of affiliations by ethnicity. So you're all, you know, all your friends are Pakistani because you're Pakistani, or they're Bangladeshi because you're Bangladeshi, or they're Egyptian because you're Egyptian. We make friends by association of professions, or by common interest, or by race, or by language. We have a need to affiliate, to know, get to know one another, and to be, you know, organized in these different social circles. And every social circle has its own standards. It has certain expectations. And what ends up happening sometimes, and by the way, the biggest circle we are part of, obviously, is our families. And in every circle there are certain standards, and sometimes these standards, these expectations, they go against and they contradict the deen of Allah. So for example, in some families, there's a pressure on you to, you know, buy a house. Because your brother bought a house. Because your cousin also bought a house. Because your distant cousin also bought a house. And your uncle also bought a house. But you can't afford a house. And everybody in your family, every time they meet you, what are they telling you? You need to buy a house. Look at your brother. Look at your cousin. Your circle of friends. Among them, there are 3 or 4 of them that got into a business. All the pressure is on you now to do what? Get into the same business. They made so much money off of it, why can't you? The question of whether it's halal or haram starts to disappear. That question starts to disappear. The only thing that you keep hearing over and over again, hey, they're doing it too. Look, they did okay too. And they got it done too. And then this happens among Muslim community, in the Muslim community, even in religious families, especially when it comes to our weddings. You know, our weddings, the wedding, the nikah, is an act of ibadah. It is a following of the sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. You make 2 rak'at nafil, that is the sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. It's an act of ibadah, right? You give sadaqah, it's an act of ibadah. When you do nikah, it is also an act of ibadah. Can you imagine hiring a DJ at an act of ibadah? Or having a party at the act of ibadah where men and women are dancing together? But we do it. Why do we do it though? You will ask the people that do it, they say, I know it's wrong. But you see, if we don't do it, they're not going to come. Or those people are going to say, what kind of wedding was this? It was held at a masjid. What kind of, you know, you people didn't even order 12 different kinds of food. So people will go into debt on their credit cards to hold off a very, very, you know, elaborate wedding just because they want people not to say anything. Because they're part of a circle and there's a certain standard in that circle. And you want to uphold that standard. So we, instead of living for ourselves and living really for the sake of Allah Azza wa Jal, we start living for the expectation of others. This starts happening. We develop this love of our reputation. What are people going to say? What are they going to say? What are they going to say? So even if you tell your family this is wrong, they'll say, we know it's wrong, but that doesn't matter. This is how we do things. This is what is expected of us. Everybody does it. You can't stop the world from being the way it is. So now Allah Azza wa Jal speaks of the people who have this love of keeping their reputation. This love of being affiliated in their circles and not being cut off. Because when you start to stick to the legacy of the Prophet ﷺ, the legacy of this deen, the legacy of simplicity, the legacy of staying within your means, when you start to stick to that legacy, then the people around you start cutting themselves off from you. You don't fit in anymore. So Allah Azza wa Jal, He speaks about the people who followed these trends. And He says, إِسْتَبَرَّأَ الَّذِينَ اتُّبِعُوا مِنَ الَّذِينَ اتَّبَعُوا. The people who used to be followed, the people who were trendsetters, the people that everybody looked up to and said, we want to be like them, we want to do what they do. When those people that set the trends for everybody else, when they are going to be disassociating themselves with everyone who used to follow them. إِسْتَبَرَّأَ الَّذِينَ اتُّبِعُوا مِنَ الَّذِينَ اتَّبَعُوا. Those who used to be followed, when they are going to be disconnecting themselves from all the people that used to follow them. So you say, hey, wait a second, I bought a house because you gave me all that advice. I did this because of you. I had the wedding for my son or my daughter in this way because you said this is the right thing to do. And now you are saying you have nothing to do with me? On the Day of Judgment, those people who you used to run after for their standards, they will be running from you. And now they're saying to Allah Azza wa Jal, you know, وَمَنْ فِي الْأَرْضِ جَمِيعًا ثُمَّ يُنْجِيهِ. Even the person goes that far. He says, oh Allah, take everyone in the world, burn them in hell, just let me go. This is how far he goes. Not even just the family. You know, that Allah mentions already. يَوْمَ يَفِرُّ الْمَرْءُ مِنْ أَخِيهِ وَأُمِّهِ وَأَبِيهِ وَفَصِيلَتِهِ الَّتِي تُؤْوِيهِ وَصَاحِبَتِهِ. And then وَمَنْ فِي الْأَرْضِ جَمِيعًا. Take everyone, let me go. So he won't care about you and they won't care about you. So now Allah Azza wa Jalla says, إِسْتَبَرَّأَ الَّذِينَ اتُّبِعُوا مِنَ الَّذِينَ اتَّبَعُوا وَرَأَوُا الْعَذَابِ. And they will all be looking at the punishment. The trendsetters and the followers. The people who caved into peer pressure, to family tradition, whatever it may have been that took them away from obedience to Allah. All of the followers and all of the leaders will be looking at the punishment. وَتَقَطَّعَتْ بِهِمُ الْأَسْبَابِ. And back in dunya, these ties used to seem like they're made of concrete. We can never break our tradition. We can never steer away from what the family wants. We can never steer away from what the society wants from us. This is the way we are. We're part of this world after all. How many times have you heard that argument? We're living in 2008. We're living in America. These arguments, right? How can you cut yourself off? Allah says, وَتَقَطَّعَتْ بِهِمُ الْأَسْبَابِ. Those relationships will be cut. They will be chopped off literally. قُطِعَتْ would have been cut. تَقَطَّعَتْ, chopped off. Like they were never together. They were completely set apart, rendered apart. وَقَالَ الَّذِينَ اتَّبَعُوا. And then the people who used to follow others blindly, they used to follow those trends, even if they violated Allah's deen. Now they're going to cry out. And what did they say? لَوْ أَنَّ لَنَا كَرَّةً فَنَتَبَرَّأَ مِنْهُمْ كَمَا تَبَرَّأُوا مِنَّا. If we only had another chance, if we had a chance to go back, we would cut ourselves off from these people, we would disassociate ourselves from these people like they're doing to us today. But it's too late now, it's the day of judgment. So Allah says, كَذَلِكَ يُرِيهِمُ اللَّهُ أَعْمَالَهُمْ حَسَرَاتٍ عَلَيْهِمْ. That is how Allah shows them their deeds, what they used to do. Just so they can cry over them. Hasarat. One hasra after another. You know, Allah Azza wa Jal could have said hasratan alayhim. Just in, looking back and crying over spilt milk, crying over it, whining over what the mistakes they've already made now that it's too late. But they will remember one mistake after another, and then another, and then another. I did this wrong, and this wrong, and this wrong. I followed you in this, and this, and this, and this. And this trend setting, in the older generation, in the older brothers and sisters that we have in our community, they have one kind of affiliation. Our youth have another kind of affiliation. Our youth are obsessed with certain kinds of music, or certain kinds of culture, hip-hop gear, or whatever clothing. And they're obsessed with that stuff, and they can't keep themselves apart from it. They change the way they talk because of it. They change the way they dress because of it. But then they look back and they say, what mistakes I made. Where was I headed? So now, لو أن لنا كرة فنتبرأ منهم كما تبرأوا منا كذلك يريهم الله أعمالهم حسرات عليهم. That is how Allah will show them their deeds when it's too late, so they can cry over them. وما هم بخارجين من النار. And they are not going to be ones that come out of the fire. May Allah not make us from them. But now the point of all of this, you see, the argument has been constructed. So now Allah Azza wa Jal leads to the conclusion, the climax of this argument. And He tells the believers, يَا أَيُّهَا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا, يَا أَيُّهَا النَّاسُ rather, كُلُوا مِمَّا فِي الْأَرْضِ حَلَالًا طَيِّبًا. O mankind, consume from what is on the earth that which is halal, permissible, طَيِّبًا, good and pure. Consume what is good and what is pure for you, what is permissible for you. Because in the end, these pressures, what do they lead us into? Into the haram. And when we compromise once, that's enough. We say we believe in Allah, we're good all the time, but when the test comes, when the time comes when you're tested, you say, I just made one mistake, everything else is fine. I just got into one little haram business, but at least I went to Hajj last year, or I'll go again for Umrah this year, I'll make up for it. Right? But I can keep doing that because I don't want to let that go. What we think in our head is, this is like, this is a deficit and you can cover it with a credit. It's like a debit on your account and you can put a credit on there and you can keep doing that. It doesn't work that way. بَلَا مَنْ كَسَبَ سَيِّئًا وَأَحَاطَتْ بِهِ خَطِيئَتُهُ فَأُولَٰئِكَ أَصْحَابُ النَّارِ. Someone who earns a single sin, but they're obsessed with that sin. And then that mistake of theirs, it overwhelms them. It invades them. It's just one sin, but you're obsessed with it. You can't let it go. And you think in your head you can pay for it by other ways, but you can't let this one sin go. Allah says about these people, that sin invades them. And they become people of the hellfire. May Allah not make us from them.